Okay, so thank you everybody, and thank you Professor Markul, and thanks to Ellen Goddard for inviting me at University of Alberta, and thanks everyone for welcoming me. So my name is Edoardo Pelli, and I'm doing this presentation on investigating consumer attitudes toward nutritional aspects of foods and the relationship with the moral values. And I'm doing that with Ellen Goddard as my co-supervisor, with Jutta Husen as my supervisor at Technical University of Munich, and also Katrin Bumplas and Philip Cuoco, who are my master thesis student at Technical University of Munich. So first, regarding nutritional evidence, what we found in our researches is that it's a really contested issue. So why it is a contested issue? Because evidence is a really young discipline, only 100 years of history, and so the corpus of established evidence is still weak. Furthermore, there are contradictory recommendations from nutritionists, and mass media has a peculiar role in publicizing controversial nutritional information based from incomplete and incorrect research studies. And the consumers also lack the specific knowledge to judge nutritional claims. Another aspect is that the food industry funds substantial nutritional and food research, and so this raises to conflict of interest.
Can you move the picture away so we can see all of the slide? I mean the participant.
Ah, okay.
Can you reduce that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and put it up.
And you can also
Drag it down. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, perfect. And so in our research, we found that an example of this contested nutritional evidence is the phenomenon of superfoods. So superfoods are foods coming mostly from developing countries, and they are vegetable products like avocado or chia seeds that are marketed with the specific nutritional benefit for health. But these nutritional benefits are not supported by scientific evidence. Furthermore, the problem of these superfoods is that they have some environmental issues and socioeconomic issues. For example, even if here we can see that avocado is advertised as an environmentally friendly and helpful product, actually it has a lot of problems like use of too much water or use of too much pesticides. And chia seeds have also the same problems. However, these superfoods, they are very popular and trendy in developed countries like US, Germany, and also Canada. And for this reason, they represent an interesting phenomenon to explore. So in this context, our contribution wants to understand the consumer beliefs and then attitudes and acceptance regarding the controversial nutritional evidence of superfoods. And also we want to see the stated preference regarding the purchase of these superfoods. Then, in order to study this issue, the first step that we did is to define theoretically consumer beliefs. So what are consumer beliefs? We found in the literature, especially in a series of papers by Gutmann, Olson, and Reynolds, that consumer beliefs can be considered as the idea that each consumer has about an object, and they can be considered as part of a hierarchical model. So first, belief link to aspects that are really concrete, such as attributes of product, and then they link to more abstract aspects, which are consequence and values. Within this theoretical hierarchical model, Gruner did a study in which he concluded that beliefs explain more the consumer attractiveness or consumer attitudes toward the products when they are linked to consequence and values, rather than when they are linked to attributes only. And therefore, these findings suggest us that values are more important than just attributes in explaining consumer beliefs. And this is also typical of heuristic information processes. And therefore, we can assume that since there is a lot of confusion around nutritional evidence of superfoods and consumers have a very little knowledge, they may form their attitudes not based only on objective attributes, but more on abstract values. And in this context, of course, here I present a photo of Homo economicus vs Homo psychologicus, because the traditional rational model based on neoclassical economics is not sufficient. So we need psychological approaches that take into account also emotional and irrational aspects of consumers. So we wanted to choose a psychological theory, and we didn't know which theory to choose, but at the end we came up with the moral foundation theory. We think that this theory is important because in this context, superfoods are always defined as good food for health, and these definitions have a strong moral connotation. And also the attribute healthy is suggested by previous literature to hint at specific discourses of moral values, such as a subject iceberg of moral values. And therefore, we think that consumer attitudes towards superfoods may be not totally rational, but may be driven by heuristic processes linked to moral values. A brief summary of this theory. So this theory basically assumes that humans have 5 innate categories of morality. The one that we can see: care harm, fairness cheating, loyalty betrayal, authority subversion, and purity sanctity degradation. And the theory assumes that these characteristics are innate in each person, and then they are shaped differently by experience and by cultural development. So then we started to look at the literature that already applied moral foundation theory to food consumption. And there will be some interesting empirical application, although it is a new field, like the Bakker and Hadders or Goddard or the other shown here. But in all these studies, they studied the issue of moral foundation theory and food consumption in different aspects, like for animal welfare or environmental aspects, but not with the specific case of nutritional evidence. And so we think that our application of moral foundation theory and nutritional evidence is quite new in the field. As I said before, our assumption is that consumers have scarce information on the nutritional evidence of superfoods, and therefore they form their beliefs not completely rationally on attributes, but more by moderation of moral value through an heuristic information process. And this is the process. Do you have a question? No, I heard that. Sorry, I heard that. Okay, and that's the process, how it is shown, as I explained it before. That's our hypothetical theoretical process. Then, in this context, our questions are: which are the consumer beliefs and attitudes and acceptance toward the nutritional evidence of superfoods, and if these beliefs are moderated by the moral values. In my PhD project, we are doing a multi-methodological approach. So before we started with the theoretical exploration of the issue through a development of a book chapter. And this book chapter finally now was accepted and all revised for publication, and so it will be forthcoming. Then we did some qualitative focus group on German consumers, and we have already the data, and we're working now on a qualitative publication. And then we are doing now a survey, a quantitative survey representative of the German and Canadian population. And regarding this survey on consumer attitudes and acceptance of superfood and moral values, we are now in the survey development process. And we have developed more or less the food survey. And so we are here to get your feedback before we start the launch. And then in the last part of my PhD, I will do economic experiment, because with economic experiment, I don't want to see only the attitude of consumers, but also the real behavior towards nutritional aspects of foods. So regarding the qualitative analysis, we did 4 focus groups with 7 participants, and participants were German and urban consumers, because we thought that these consumers are the more interested in this new trend of superfoods. We did the focus group online, given COVID-19 situation, and we wanted to develop consumer beliefs on nutritional evidence and the relationship with moral values. And because our starting point was the moral foundation theory, we used a deductive approach. So we draw the category from the theory, and from the literature on consumer beliefs on nutritional evidence of superfoods. And then we assign the piece of text to the pieces of the codes to the pieces of text, and then from that assignment we did an interpretation with the support of the MaxQDA software. But the MaxQDA software was important just to assign the codes to the piece of text. Then the interpretation has been done by our independent elaboration without the software. And some findings are in line also with our expectation, are that nutritional evidence is a complex task, and consumer have limited nutritional knowledge, and therefore this evidence cannot be assessed completely rationally, but is driven by gut feeling and heuristic processes. And one of the simplified process that helped consumer to judge nutritional information was the Nutri-Score, which is a policy voluntary scheme that was born in France, and now it's quite popular in the European Union, and that gives a score of a product based on the quality and nutritional quality, and can be from A, which is the best score, to E, I think, which is the worst scores. And this Nutri-Score was really interesting for us, because even if we didn't ask about that, they mentioned this topic. And then other findings is that we found that consumer had low familiarity with the terms of superfoods, and then we found also associations with the moral values like care, harm, and consumer attitudes toward the negative and the socioeconomic and environmental aspects of superfoods. Because, for example, consumers may care like for the bad condition of producers in developing countries of superfoods, or mothers, they care for their children. But, however, we found a linkage between the moral values and the characteristic of superfoods. We didn't find that this was linked by heuristic information processes. So we found heuristic information processes related to nutritional knowledge, but not related to the moral values. And in this sense, we revised a little bit the theoretical framework. And so we see that moral values are linked to consumer beliefs, not necessarily through heuristic information processes. However, this is a kind of a qualitative study, so we cannot generalize. And in our survey, then we still want to test the previous model in which moral foundation are linked to heuristic information processes. So the next step, the quantitative survey, we're going to do a quantitative survey both in Germany and Canada on 2 representative samples. And we already started a pre-study in Germany. We got 200 participants, and we are now implementing also a pre-study in Canada. And of course, in this survey, we want to see the consumer beliefs, attitudes, and acceptance of nutritional evidence of superfoods and the relationship with the moral values. One of the instruments that we use to measure the consumer endorsement for moral values is the Moral Foundation questionnaire developed by Jonathan Haidt and colleagues, plus a food-specific Moral Foundation questionnaire that we developed based on an inspiration from the animal welfare specific Moral Foundation questionnaire developed by Jonge Van Trip. So, in addition to moral foundation, we want also to introduce the concept of moral intensity, because moral foundation are abstract values. And so maybe it will be difficult to link directly to food product purchases or food product decision-making situations. Instead, moral intensity are another construct developed by Jones and then applied by Singh Paddy and also by McCannon and Harvey. And this concept of moral intensity show that when consumers face the decision on specific issue like buy or not an environmentally friendly food, buy or not a food that is unethical, ethically or unethically done for the processing in the supply chain. So in these specific issues, consumers have some moral reaction to that issues. And these moral reactions are called as moral intensity. So we want to estimate if moral values are moderated by moral intensity when consumers form their attitude and decision and behavior towards specific cases of moral food choices, like for example choosing a food product that is not environmentally friendly. And moral intensity was already applied in the context of food product decision that have some issues related to climate change. And so we took that piece from the literature and we try to make a change on that and see how moral intensity is related to food choices that involve environmental impact of food. So that's the survey structure, and it's very long. And actually, we are here also to have your feedback because maybe we want to reduce something on the survey. But as we can see, first, we want to see consumer nutritional attitudes towards food, and then subjective and objective nutritional knowledge, both for food, but also for superfoods. And then we have also the questions on the moral foundation, both our originally developed food moral foundation questionnaire and the original by Haidt, and also the questions on moral intensity regarding environmental aspects of food and ethic aspects of foods. Then we want to go more specific and see a choice experiment of a particular superfood, which is quinoa, with different combination of 4 attributes and attribute levels. So we have the Nutri-Score, because it's important to see the nutritional characteristic, the organic label, because it may be related to the environmental characteristics, and the fair trade label, because may be related to the ethical issues, and then the price, of course, because it's the main economic part. And we want to also have an information treatment on the nutritional, environmental, and ethical aspects of quinoa before the choice experiment, with a control group that has no information and a group that has information to see the effect of the information. And then, besides social demographic variables, the other question that we are interested in is certainty and policy consequentiality questions. Because we saw in the literature of environmental public goods that there is increasing interest in asking if consumer choices are important, if consumer thinks that their choices and their attitudes are important and will be used to develop public policy. And so we thought that since these questions are used mainly in environmental public goods, we thought it could be interesting to include these questions in our case, in which we have private goods and we have food consumption. Because also academics are always saying that consumer studies for food are important to develop food policy, so these policy consequentiality questions may be helpful to have this link. So this is the conceptual framework that we expect, and so as we said, nutritional attitude and knowledge are guided by heuristic information processes and by moral values. But moral values, especially for environmental and ethical aspects, may be moderated by moral intensity. And all these contracts then will lead in consumer beliefs, and consequently attitudes and acceptance.
I think Mohammed has a question. Go to the chat.
Yes.
Chat.
Sorry, I did not write in the chat. Should I write in the chat?
No, it's fine. Ask your question.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I can ask the question now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering, in a normal choice experiment, we only see the different choices that the consumer has to choose or the participants has to choose. But you're extending that to the treatment and control group. Is it a new development that you're working on, or is it like, are you following any other's work on that one?
Yes, I saw other papers in which they used the information treatment with the choice experiment to see the effect of the information. And normally, I think that the most common way to do that is to divide the sample in a control group and in an informed group. So I've seen that also in other papers Was that I answered to your questions?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
So Jericho has a question.
Jericho, yes.
Yes, hi everyone. Hi Edoardo. Sorry for not being there in person, but I wonder, I have two small questions, and probably you already talked about them, but if so, I'm sorry. Why quinoa? Why as a superfood quinoa? Is it like, do you have, I think you're doing this in more than one country, so is it, do you know the market share of quinoa? Is it well known by these countries? And have you thought about adding the origin of the country of the product, like the country origin of the product, as an important variable that might, an attribute that perhaps might help, because you see moral values sometimes can be different if the quinoa is from Germany or from Canada, which I'm sure if they can be cropped there, or if they are from the other countries in the Andes. I don't know if that can affect the moral of the consumer.
Thank you very much, Jericho, for the question. So why quinoa? We chose quinoa because with quinoa, I was able to find a product that have negative environmental aspects and negative ethical aspects, and also some very marketed nutritional benefits. So it was the product that had the better combination of these mixes. And also, as you said, quinoa is very popular, especially in Germany, and also is popular also in North America. And now there is a new market for organic quinoa. That's why we include the organic label. And thank you for the suggestion. I think it will be really interesting also to include the country of origin label, because it may be linked to moral values, like, for example, the moral value of loyalty. So being loyal to a country of origin of a product. So thank you very much. That would be a great suggestion.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, yeah, this is just to show again the categories of the moral values, because maybe we have forget, since I said them 15 minutes ago. Those are the categories. And then this is the moral foundation questionnaire. So as we see, it measures the consumer endorsement of each moral foundation. This is the original by Haidt, so not specific to food. And for each moral foundation, there are 3 statements. Like, for example, for care harm, the statement is when you decide whether something is right or wrong, to what extent are the following considerations relevant to your thinking? And then the sentence is whether or not someone suffered emotionally. And so the consumers rate this sentence through a Likert scale to see if it's not relevant or if it's relevant. And of course, based on the score that they have, they can have a low endorsement or a high endorsement of moral foundations. And that's also for the other categories, like of fairness of cheating. One sentence is whether or not some people were treated differently than others, and so on. Here we have the same for the other categories: loyalty, betrayal, authority, subversion, and purity, sanctity. Here is the food-specific moral foundation that we developed. So based on the work on the Jonge Van Trip, who developed a food-specific moral foundation questionnaire for animal welfare, we developed a food-specific moral foundation questionnaire more on the environmental aspects and on the ethical aspects, and also on the nutritional aspects. So, for example, for care harm, we say, for me, it's important that production of food item has a negative or positive impact on the environment. And then consumers have a score. So in this way, we use the same system of Haidt, but related to food, so that we can link the moral foundation to food situation. And for example, for fairness cheating, we put, for me, it is important that a healthy diet and nutritional diet is equally accessible to everyone in the world. This is also the same thing for all the other categories. And then these are the moral intensity scales. So the moral intensity scales are more about what are people's reaction between specific issues, and building from the moral intensity scale of Vaino and Macchianiemi, that was about climate change. We did one for environment and another one for ethical aspects. So and these are the categories of the moral intensity. So magnitude of consequences, social consensus, temporal immediacy, probability of effect, proximity of effect, and concentration of effects. And for example, in proximity of effects, one way to measure the moral intensity is to ask if the harmful effects on environmental impact food choices will affect people close to me. And this is the scale for the ethical aspects of foods. So, for example, in magnitude of consequences, we asked the consumers if the negative consequences of unfair treatment of labor in the agri-food supply chain will be very serious. Because we decided to explore the topic of fair and unfair labor in the agri-food supply chain, because it's an ethical issue also that it's tried to be solved using the fair trade label. So that's why we cover that. And that's also, again, for the ethics of food. And then here we have the choice experiment. So as we said, we have quinoa. Sorry, the image is still of a German quinoa, but it's quinoa. And the labels are Nutri-Score label A, because quinoa is the best score. Then the organic label. So here we have the German, and then there we have the Canadian, and then the fair trade label. So these are our three labels. And this is the combination of attributes and attribute levels. So we have two alternatives of the same quinoa, plus of a no-buy option. And then each alternative has 4 attributes. And the attributes are the organic label, that can have a yes or no level, so 2 levels. A Nutri-Score A label, best score, that can be also present and absent, so 2 levels. A fair trade label, that can be present or absent, so also 2 levels. And then the prices, which are 4 levels based on the current market prices. And we decided to take the median market prices and then go up in order not to have too cheap prices. And at the beginning, we were thinking to have 6 levels, but then these are the levels that we used for the pre-study. But then for the survey, we think it will be better to have just 4 price level, because of the combination of number of attributes and attributes levels with 4 prices level would be easier. So in the choice experiment, the people will receive before the choice set a very brief information just to introduce to the topic. So this information will go both to control group and treated group. It's just say that what is quinoa, that's a superfood, and so on. But then only the treatment group will receive this information treatment, which is about the purported nutritional benefits of quinoa and the negative environmental and socioeconomic impacts. Regarding the choice set design, we are still in its development, but the idea is to have an orthogonal design with 32 choice sets and with a sample of 1,000, 2,000 people. And these 32 choice sets will be divided in 4 groups, and each group will have 8 choice sets, because also our questionnaire is very long, so to keep the length, it's better to have just 8 choice sets. And of course, we welcome your suggestion also on the choice experiment design. This is just how a choice set will look like, so based on the attribute and attributes level before. And then now these are the certainty questions. So we ask basically to consumers if they think that the questions in the questionnaire, which is a stated preference, will be the same in a grocery store. This is something that has been increasingly important in the literature, and so we want to do that.
We have a question by Michael.
Yes, Michael?
Michael Olefumi.
Hi, Edoardo.
Hi, Michael.
Yeah, the question I want to ask is regarding the 4 groups you mentioned for the respondents. So how do you intend to allocate or distribute the respondents into the 4 groups?
We were thinking to go that randomly. We're thinking to go that randomly because basically I think that we try to do that in order to have all the 32 possible choice sets in order to have a good design, and also we do that so that each person has maximum of 8 choices so that the survey is not too long.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We have another questions?
Thank you, Michael.
All right.
No?
You're good.
Okay, yeah, almost finished anyway. Then here we have the policy consequentiality questions that are the one that we said that are very important in the literature of environmental public goods, but now they are still like a new field in private goods like food. And basically we ask if they think that the outcome of the survey will influence decision of Canadian authorities to regulate food labels. And also we ask consumers if they think that the individual response can affect the survey, because these were described as two different paths of policy consequentiality. So not only ask about the importance of the survey, but the importance of the people responses. I think Jericho has a question, yes?
Jericho, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Edoardo. I had a question before about the prices. I seen some literature asking like if people know, and I think like it depends where you put it. Not only if they bought quinoa, because sometimes they might not, but they might know the price. And that can also give you a control if the price they know for the kilo of quinoa or the bag of quinoa is close to the ones you presented or the one they chose. So that can be an option. I don't know. I see in some papers that they ask at some point of the survey if you know what's the real price of the market of the product. But I think it was after they were asked to make the choice. So I don't know, just as a suggestion to maybe to look up as a control too, if they are familiar with the product. And the other question was mostly, I think, so the consequentiality questions are very good, I think, interesting for public goods. And I think like in this case, it's interesting that you put in for private ones, but do you think that they could be a mismatch? Because in the choice experiment, you're asking them to select a product to buy, right? But now in this consequentiality, you're asking that the government can regulate. And it seems like it's the first time, I don't know, the first time you bring this up for them. So I was making a selection as a private consumer, and now I'm asking a question about a public policy. So do you think that can that confuse the respondents? Because there seems to be a mismatch. And I think this is an important question to ask in the literature. How can we make private goods more consequential? Because they are private, right? You can select not to buy it at the end.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Jericho. So regarding the price, yeah, that would be interesting to ask consumers which they think is the real price. And the answer may be difficult, because when I was looking at the price for quinoa, I put here as the baseline the medium price, but it was very difficult to find the medium price because the price range is very high. So it's very complicated issue, the price. But yeah, I think, thank you for the suggestion. It would be good to ask them what they think is the current market price. And regarding the policy consequentiality questions, yeah, it can be a little bit tricky for private goods. I thought it would be interesting because the governments are doing a lot of work in regulating food labels. And so knowing so asking consumers if they think that the responses are important to that, I think it's important because we are in a moment where there are a lot of regulatory changes by the government, and government made a lot of changes in food labels. Another option would be to ask consumers if they think that their choices are going to influence marketing and production strategies of companies. So that would be another thing that would be done for private goods.
Yeah, I think I really agree with that. Sorry. Yeah, but I think that the last part about whether the markets will consider the answers of these surveys, something I haven't seen much, and I think it's very interesting to see how much me as a consumer can influence private markets instead of the government.
Yeah, exactly. It's another option. So we have to see which one is better and follow with one of both. Okay. Thank you, Jericho.
Edoardo,
Yes.
Sven.
Sven, sorry.
Very good. I have lots of questions, Edoardo, but maybe the one that bugs me the most is you're using a choice experiment, so you're estimating or getting willingness to pay. How do you relate willingness to pay to the role of these moral intensity and moral values. How is that going to show up?
Okay, I will show, I try to answer the question with the next slide.
Sure.
So these are another policy consequentiality questions. Then, yeah, exactly. Our main question is the econometric model. So how to put all these things together. So what Ellen Goddard did in this first publication is to measure the endorsement of the moral foundation with that scale that we saw, and then measure the independent and the dependent variable and see if the changes in this relationship change by being in a group of low score, of high score, of moral foundations. So in our situation, we have moral foundation and moral intensities. So we could measure the score of these people by moral foundation and moral intensity, and for each category, the people who have a low score and or a high score, depending on what they answer. And then we are gonna estimate the model having as the dependent variable the probability of choosing each level of the attributes of quinoa, and then from that we have the willingness to pay, and having a lot of stuff in the independent variables, so the labels, the price, the social demographic, the nutritional knowledge, and the policy consequentiality questions. And so we see if the probability of choosing each level of attributes of quinoa and the willingness to pay based on the independent variable varies by being in a group of low endorsement or high endorsement of moral foundation and moral intensity.
My hypothesis would be that people with high moral values would choose not to buy quinoa as to maximize the impact of their moral values. But because by not consuming, I'm not causing harm, I'm not cheating, I'm not doing anything wrong by staying away. The moment I buy the product, I'm becoming part of the problem, even if it's organic, because like Jericho suggested, if you clearly label this quinoa comes from Peru, and I have my moral value suggest that Peruvian quinoa causes all these issues, I'm just not buying it. So
that's a choice in the experiment.
yeah, exactly. But if that's a result, then
It won't be a result. But,
why not?
well, less than a third of the responses will be that.
We'll see. But I mean, maybe you should be prepared to conceptualize this, because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that would be my interpretation of how the moral values affect the choice behavior. You know, when you control for price and everything else, but a person that's very morally astute may just not engage in your process.
Yeah, that could happen, especially when we give the information treatment. When we say, okay, these are the negative environmental and socioeconomic aspects. Maybe these, could be less when we don't have the information treatment. So for the control group, so maybe that would be something that we can see with the information treatment.
Sure.
And
maybe some
yes.
more questions left to this. I'm wondering, like, who are your target population to select sample from? Are you going to focus only on individuals who have experience in using the product, or you are going to just consider everybody, every potential customer?
So thanks again for the question. So the focus group was done with a sample of young consumers, because we thought that they're more interested in this kind of superfoods. But for the real survey, we thought it would be better to do a survey of the general population, so representative of the population. And then we are asking a lot of social demographic questions that I have also later at the end of these slides. And in this social demographic question, we ask which is your field of work, which is your field of study, because of course, if a person studies food or works in the food sector or grocery store, they may have a different perception also based on that, respect to a person that has nothing to do with food except for eating.
Okay, like my question is that, like, if, for example, I have no experience in consuming or purchasing the quinoa product. So if you ask me my subjective, for example, the nutritional score or nutritional aspect of that product, I have no idea. So it's only the people who have had experience of consume this product tell you the nutritional, like what they consider about the nutritional values they get from that product, or the information about the environmental impact, or being like labeled as fair trade or organic. So I was wondering if it would be like relevant to focus only on people who have consumed or who have experience of using that product, because you are designing survey for a particular item, right?
Yeah, thanks. I see your point. Maybe it would be helpful to do a pre-scanning of the people, like a selection,
Yes.
asking
Yes.
if they ever bought quinoa and if they ever have the product, and then maybe select the people. I mean, I think we have one question if we ask they ever bought quinoa, but maybe, as you said, another step would be also like to select only the people that has seen quinoa once in their life.
True.
Yeah, yes.
So I visited some of the parts of Peru where they grow quinoa. Right higher up the mountains, they grow maca. Maca would be a really great example for this because it'd be less well known, and it is very dramatic negative environmental consequences. So prices go through the roof and it crashes. So it's an interesting food you should check out. But organic labeling, so my two other points. Organic labeling is interesting because organic content, soil fertility mining is an often consequence of having organic label, right? So if you're not able to use inorganic fertilizers, it's actually worse for the environment, the land environment, than if you are able, if you going with certified organic may be bad for the environment. So you have to think about that in terms of how you're presenting the information. So organic doesn't necessarily mean low environmental effect. Maybe the opposite.
Yeah.
The other one with the policy consequentiality. I wonder if you will just, as part of your cheap talk text, maybe even as part of the consent form, you will explain who you're going to provide information to before to set up the consequentiality question. So if you say, we're going to present this as scientific information at trade shows where buyers will be present, blah, 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 or to policymakers, that warms them up a bit to the idea of this study being consequential.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brent. Yes, regarding the maca, thanks. That's interesting. I included it in the focus group that we did. So there was also maca in the 8 superfoods that we did. And I thought also to use maca. The only thing is that, yes, as you said, it's less famous than quinoa in developed countries, and so maybe there will be then the issue that Sergey was saying that no one consuming. But maca, it's really interesting. And regarding the organic label, it's a trade-off, because I also saw that sometimes organic doesn't mean necessarily more environmentally sustainable. And that's why, in the information treatment, I didn't give information on organic, and I want to see what the people think, because, as you said, it's also controversial. And regarding the policy consequentiality question, I think maybe we can have a cheap talk script before. I was just wondering if for ethics matters, it's okay, like, to say that we are gonna show the policymaker even if we don't. But,
well, won't you? No, make sure you do.
Yeah, you will. But can I also say that it's remember that he's got these steps in the study, the focus groups in both countries, the survey in both countries, and then very specific economic experiments where some of the stuff with different products and different links with even what Sven said about if you are this score in the moral foundation, you'll never buy the product. Those things can be tested in the experiment in a much easier way than in the survey. But the survey gives you a clue as to whether that's a useful path to go. Anyway, that's what I thought made the study interesting.
yes.
By the way, I'm a big fan. I think it's an awesome idea. I had not known about many of the foundations and so on that you're building on. It's kind of exciting. But because you have such a nice theoretical foundation that's very broad-based, that can explain, you mentioned climate change, you have nutrition, you have social aspects in producing countries, and yet your main quantitative focus is on quinoa, which, even on your very first slide with the expenditures or the importance in the market, I would suspect a lot of people don't use quinoa, don't know nothing about quinoa production. And in terms of an expenditure share, it's a rounding error. And then when you come to consequentiality, people say, well, I buy quinoa twice a year because my aunt is gluten intolerant. So who cares about quinoa? Why would you not use the 6 or 7 major, like avocados? Why don't you use quinoa, avocados, and these acai berries or something, and make your choice modeling, your choice design around varying the products. So if somebody indicated that they have bought avocados, put them into the avocado box. Somebody says, yes, I have purchased quinoa. You've done the quinoa version. Or somebody says, oh yeah, I have like an acai smoothie. Put them in the acai version. And then you just have 3 different or 5 different versions of your treatment, of your policy. But when you write your paper, you can say, we tested these very foundational concepts on a range of very different superfoods, which they all have environmental, they all have social, they all have other consequentiality outcomes, which, like looking at it from a sort of reviewer perspective, they did it across different, a range of products, which allows you to also tap into different countries, origin countries. If you think about origin labeling, so Germans may think about Peru differently than Mexico. I think Canadians would, because they know Mexico, they may not go to Peru for their education. So there's loyalty, right? Look at these feelings. And I don't think it would make your choice experiment much more complicated. But I
We need a much bigger sample, and that's the expensive part.
yeah, but if you have 2,000 people,
No, that is enough to do this. To add the
Yeah.
products on, you probably need 4,000 people.
are you sure? I mean, of course,
Given
if
the
you,
experimental design.
if you want to have
and
if you want to have 500 people in each of the treatment groups, then yes. But
anyway, that's kind of the trade-off.
maybe think about it. But
Yeah. No,
Maybe 2 products, maybe.
thank you,
use
Sven.
avocados. Use avocados. I think it would be strengthening
Yeah.
your
No.
argument.
Eat tons of avocados.
Yeah.
Lots of people, not so much.
No, yeah, thank you very much, Ben, for the connection, for the suggestion. So using 2 products like avocado or more would be great for just because of you said, so we can have a more general overview and not just one product. But that's why to have a more general overview, what I try to do also is to ask about nutritional attitudes. We have some questions about nutritional attitudes and nutritional behavior, and so we can see these in relation to the moral values and see if the moral values influence that. And then for these nutritional attitudes, we are like in a more general way.
Sorry, I just have one more thing. The moral intensities I've never heard before. Seems really awesome. Can you specify that for this case a little bit following Sven's point? Can you judge how engaged to that quinoa purchase someone is? Is the moral intensity a way to get at that?
Okay, so yeah.
So it's kind of linked to consequentiality in that sense, right?
Yeah, because I mean, what we have seen in moral intensity reading the literature is, for example, like in the case of superfood, I have this quinoa who have controversial environmental aspects. So maybe the moral value who is linked to that, the moral foundation is care harm. But this is a very abstract concept. So the moral intensity would be really the reaction that I have, the cognitive reaction that I have, seeing the moral reaction that I have, seeing this product which is bad for the environment. So it will be quite in the middle between the moral foundation and the attitude toward the product.
Can I add one thing?
Yes.
So it's bad for the environment for people that are a long way away that I don't know in another part of the world, versus it's bad for the environment for the farmer I know really well who lives down the road from me. That would be one of the proximity moral intensity issues that we can build in with the quinoa. example. That's why I think the moral intensity stuff is kind of fun.
Then that brings to like the moral intensity or moral standards by itself is not exogenous, right? Different factors affect
Yeah.
my moral values. Like if I am related to people who are going to be affected, or if I don't know who the victims are.
Well,
So,
exactly, but
yeah.
in general, I believe that we shouldn't have victims. I
Ah.
think having victims is bad.
Yes.
But maybe, you know, if
Yeah.
the victim is my neighbor, I'm gonna make a different decision than if the victim is,
Far away, yeah. It's different. Yeah.
so that, I thought that was neat.
Interesting.
I think Eduardo felt stuck with it, but he
Interesting.
now thinks it's neat.
Yeah, because it,
Right, you think that, huh?
I mean, the moral intensity was her idea. And so that it was how I thought that the model at the beginning, because it was how it was done by Ellen Goddard. But then I saw that other people put the moral foundation as directly independent variable. So to see how the dependent variables of attitudes towards an option changes because of the moral foundation. And since we have also this moral intensity, we could like see the link between moral foundation and moral intensity, and then in another model put moral intensity as an independent variable. So we were undecided if it would be better this approach, or if it would be better to have just the independent variable and cluster the people by moral foundation and moral intensity. So that it's our.
So you thought about latent class approach, that seems to be where.
Well, this one would end up being a latent class.
Okay, so Brent, do you think that this second approach would be better?
So in your analysis of the responses to the choice questions, you have lots of constraints on that, right? Of how you must present that information. But latent class allows you to kind of sort people, and you can put different more variables into that. So that's sorting people into groups of respondents on the basis of their moral attitudes, moral intensities. Then that's a good place to do that with latent class. And then other factors that you think may also affect people sorting into these groups.
Okay. There is a question, yes?
Hi, I'm wondering how is the endogeneity coming from your model, and how are you going to take care of it?
The endogeneity, you ask?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, for the policy consequentiality questions, there are some instrumental variables that allow to control for endogeneity. So for the policy consequentiality question, at least we decided to use these instrumental variables.
But can general multinomial logic model take care of endogeneity?
That's a good question. Yeah, probably it would be better, as was saying, Brent, a latent class model in this equation.
Then,
There's all kinds of,
No, Sven, Brent.
there's all kinds of fancy econometric ways to play it. It makes it much more interesting, the econometric.
But it's good to think about those kind of things before you design survey, because like finding good experiment is practically difficult task. So like if you have right experiments, you can use, for example, control function approach in multinomial logic model to control for the like endogenous using I, but all depend on your nature of data and the way you measure it.
Yeah.
Yes, Sven.
You have nutrition in your title, but we're talking about everything but nutrition. So, I mean, this nutrition, so you said it's a very controversial topic. So how is your study design addressing the controversial views that people have of the nutritional value of superfoods? How are you going to capture that?
Yeah, thank you. So one question is the nutritional knowledge questions. So we're going to do subjective nutritional knowledge and objective nutritional knowledge and see the relationship with that. And so we're gonna see if there is difference yet between the subjective and the objective, and then also nutritional attitudes, and then also by this attribute of Nutri-Score, which is kind of a simplification of the reason of the consumer reasoning. So instead of reasoning, I see the score that it's good, and I said it's okay or not. And I said, like, I'm willing to pay more for this score or not. I care or I don't care. And yeah, that's right. Sometimes the nutrition got to be lost because we found during the way that also environmental aspects and ethical aspects are important for superfoods, not only nutrition. So it's like a merging of these three aspects.
So, and also, Fred and I noticed that in your design, that all your attributes are present, no presence. They're all by
Yeah, except price.
Yeah, except price. So I know you said that quinoa has a score of A, but would it be ethical to introduce a variation in the Nutri-Score variable by pretending that quinoa can come in A, B, C, possibly D? So that maybe people that, I don't know if it makes sense, but
A plus, A minus.
something like that. No, but if you wanted to explore people's trade-offs between the awesomeness, the nutritional awesomeness of superfoods, and then all the issues that are going on with the ethics and the morality, shouldn't you vary the strength of both? You vary the strength of the harm side with all your labels. Because if I get Nutri-Score label, organic label, and fair trade label, then everything is taken care of on the bad side, but you only have an A score always on the plus side.
Yeah.
So if you vary that, let's say you go to an A minus or a B plus, then you lower that, and then you could measure whether people, would still like the superfoods if they're just B plus super as opposed to A plus.
But in that case, you would like to.
Yeah.
You would like to.
Yes.
Exactly, and we're not supposed to about private goods, and we have to do debriefing, and that makes the ethical application longer and the survey longer.
But the French system has been heavily criticized for taking a broad.
Oh, and the Australian system and the New Zealand system, yes.
So it might as well be that an A plus is a B plus.
But we've got A and nothing.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, there is no nutritional value or A. I mean, there are two levels in the.
I know what that, yeah, but I was just wondering out loud that whether that might be.
Yeah, that would be, would be a possibility, but then it would be the trade-off, because then it would be like unrealistic. So like in the reality, quinoa has always an A score.
So I can see that your moral intensity is really high.
But I think that this is the business that we're trying to construct, I think, which is that really positive nutrition may come at a huge ethical cost or may come at a huge environmental cost.
Could you say instead of, okay, so you have the Nutri-Score or you don't have it, so like nothing. Could you have, instead of a 0, could you have product not been certified for its nutrition? To put it into the face of the respondent that it has a Nutri-Score, so it's a verified A, but explicitly say, this product is not nutritionally tested or something like that. So at least you create some thinking on the mind of the consumer of what the non-presence of the Nutri-Score may mean for the nutritional quality of what they get.
The other thing we were thinking about that we haven't got to yet because the survey is too long is asking after the fact. If this had been the choice instead of that, would that have changed your choices? It's sort of like a certainty thing, but it couched in a different way. And that way we could bring in what you're talking about.
You did a very good job presenting it, Edoardo. But I asked that question because the nutritional superfoods aspect sort of gets a little bit lost without morality.
Yeah.
And you're using the benefits of the nutritional benefits as a counterweight to the morality.
To the negatives, yeah.
Yeah, but it gets a little sort of on the side. But if it's in your title, you should pump up the action.
Yeah, that's why. we have these nutritional knowledge questions that I have in the appendix, if you want I can show. But yeah, then I think it went a little bit mixed up with the environmental and ethical, because we have these three aspects.
But in policy consequentiality, maybe you could break the nutritional. Would people maybe prefer a stronger regulation of nutritional labeling for all foods? Would they want restrictions on the marketing of such foods? Because you presented your case was that they are supermarketed, right? But a lot of marketing and they still have questionable nutritional benefits, which could be an argument for stricter labeling regulations in the EU or North America, because it's misleading consumers, right? You know, you see all that, acai berries, like super grapes.
Yeah.
People believe that if they drink one smoothie, they're going to look different the next day, which most people.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Any more questions?
And somebody else has raised their hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we kind of get into it. I'm being the non-economist here. Why labels? Why are you focusing on labels, and is why that policy problem? I'm assuming that's the conversation Ellen's going to make you have with the policymakers. Labeling, what's appropriate. Why focusing in on labels when you're talking about these kind of value-based consumer choices?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I wanted to label because at the end is building on this moral behavior. At the end, the label, it's what the consumer will face. So like when there is a product decision making, then you have a product and you have the label. So
not being familiar with this area, are we confident that consumers have those labels in their faces and actually act on the behalf and in their value kind of ways? Given the kind of complexity of values you're talking about, climate change, sustainability, these huge uncertain values, are we confident that when consumers look at a fair trade value, and they look at an organic kind of label, that they're actually equating those really complex social and moral values with what they see on a counter ball?
yeah, that's an open question, I guess, and it's one also of our open questions. I mean, through the survey, if consumers cares about the labels.
That's what food economists have been doing for 40 years. Put a label on it and hope for it.
Well, and we're trying to figure out if it makes sense or not, or if we should butt out of it.
Yeah, and interesting on the qualitative, we're going to have these focus groups and thinking about how those, these three aspects come together.
Yeah.
You would imagine those focus groups are going to have much more diverse kind of conversations emerge out of them than you can either have in your experiment or your survey. So it'll be interesting to see how you draw lines across those different processes.
Yeah, and regarding the focus groups, so when we were asked them about what you think about nutritional aspects of food and how nutrition is communicated, they mentioned the Nutri-Score by themselves. So I didn't thought about Nutri-Score in the design. I didn't mention their Nutri-Score. They just say it's helpful, this policy of Nutri-Score, because it simplifies things, but then I don't know the criteria with which this Nutri-Score was built. So yeah, at least for Nutri-Score, that was also the main reason why I need to choose that.
Can I ask one more question? Can you make immoral decisions when you have that are contrary to your moral foundation?
Yes, you can make it.
So when I go buy a bottle of Coca-Cola, I'm pretty certain that that is both A, unhealthy, and B, probably immoral, but I still buy the bottle. So what does that mean in these kind of contexts where consumers may not have the choice to behave in purely moral or ethical ways? You're always involved in some kind of trade-off, and we drive our car somewhere as opposed to not. Is there an assumption here that you can make a moral decision?
Yeah, I mean, it can be. Yeah, thank you for the question. Maybe also with the moral intensity, because the moral intensity is in the middle between the moral foundation and the purchase decision. So maybe I could have like a moral values that say, okay, Coke is immoral, and then but then my moral intensity in the decision that makes me to take the Coke because I want to drink, or because I don't have so many other options.
Or because me having a Coke isn't going to make any difference, since there so many billion other people in the world get Coke. So anyway, that's really where the link is, because the moral foundations is very fundamental. So most people would say, yes, this is wrong and this is right to some degree. But then how do you actually translate that into decisions? Because we're constantly rationalizing with heuristic rules all the time. Really interesting stuff.
Don't eat maca.
But quinoa is okay?
Quinoa is okay.
Yeah, okay.
So maybe I have not. For example, if I am buying something, it's not necessarily that I'm going to consume it. I can buy it for my family member. So in the questionnaire, are you going to consider, for example, purchases for family members, or it's like, does that affect, for example, in a family, I may have like some moral like standards and moral values, but my family member may have different perception about or different moral values or moral something. I may not want to buy a product that has negative environmental consequences, but my spouse may ignore regard to any environmental concerns. I might be end up buying that product because of not my moral decision, but I'm making that sub-moral decision because of my family member preferences or perception about the environmental values or perception about the nutritional values. Does that matter in your survey, or is there any way to capture that?
I think it matters, thanks. And it's a very complex issue. One way to touch this issue is that in the social demographic question we ask, like, if you have children in your household, and how, because here we have the, okay, these are the nutritional attitudes, and then we have also the social demographic, and we ask also who is, how many children younger than 18 years old live in your household, who is responsible for purchasing in your household, who is responsible for cooking, and all that stuff. So yeah, we thought that that was a way.
And there's usually a distinction between purchasing and consuming.
Yes.
That we often ask too.
Yes.
And
And I tell Brent, we have to have one at one end of the survey and the other at the other end of the survey, or people will think it's the same question.
yeah, and to cover the nutritional aspects, as was saying by Sven, so and to be more general, we found in the literature some nutritional attitudes in which they ask about the healthy diet behavior. And then we have the subjective nutritional knowledge, in which we ask what they think they know about. And then we have the also subjective knowledge and acceptance specific to superfoods and the health benefits. And then we have also the objective nutritional knowledge, asking like questions on nutritional knowledge and asking them and see if they answer right or wrong.
So we have this. We have to conclude. Yeah. We have a last question by Abdulhamid.
Yes.
Abdulhamid, can you talk?
Yeah, hello. So I just wondering, what are your expectations on the fair trade and then the organic labels in calculating the willingness to pay, as you intend to do that from their associated probabilities?
Thank you for the question. We don't know exactly, but I mean, the general idea is that the organic label and the fair trade label increases the acceptance and the willingness to pay, because it's at least in as perceived as a social and environmental benefit. Although, as it was said also by Brent, that may be controversial because an environmental label doesn't mean necessary that the product is sustainable. So it's a trade-off, I would say.
Helen, did you want to conclude? No? Okay, thank you, Edoardo. That was a nice discussion we had. This is pretty much the last seminar that we have for the semester. We will come back
end of August, beginning of September with new talks. And so I wish you a nice summer full of research.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can stop the recording.